Hello, I'm Nigel Pepper. I'm a county councillor. I'm someone who represents lots of people with their concerns about education, fire and rescue service, the state of our roads, etc. Today I'm going to be reading from a book called Woof. Now I'm not sure on the chapter because on my copy it has been chopped off. But with a little bit of research I believe it to be Exit Eric, chapter 8. When Roy saw a dog's head poke under the partition, he stopped singing. When the dog joined him in the cubicle and he could see it was a Norfolk Terrier, he said, "A dog? I don't believe it. Eric, is that you?" Somehow Eric kept his wits and remembered the code. "Woof," he said. Roy, for his part, was immediately confused. He was scared a little and excited a lot. "Woof," he said. "What's that? One for yes?" "Woof," said Eric. "Or one for no?" "Woof, woof," Eric said. But already Roy was hardly listening. He couldn't concentrate on codes. Instead he crouched and peered intently into Eric's face. "Eric, I think I recognise you. Eric, you've got the same expression." Now Roy was looking under the partition into Eric's cubicle. He could see a pair of feet in the next but one, but Eric's was empty. His excitement grew. "It is you, isn't it? It's really happened." Then almost without thinking, he patted his friend's head and ruffled the fur along his back. "Hey, this is great! Eric, it's brilliant!" The truth is, Roy had been waiting for Eric to change ever since he'd known it was possible. He'd even felt irritated at times because it was taking so long. He almost accused Eric of not trying. Eric sat on the floor, avoiding the puddles and Roy's wet trunks. He looked up at Roy, who was the picture of a contented swimmer, puckered face, red-rimmed eyes, and especially in his case, cockatoo hair. He had his underpants on and one sock. Eric, of course, couldn't altogether share Roy's opinion. When the transformation began, he'd briefly felt more frantic than the first time. This time he knew what was coming. Now, having recovered somewhat and being the level-headed boy he was, the thought in his mind was, how do I get out of here? Also, he was beginning to feel concerned about his clothes, his swimming kit, his bag, his watch, and his crisp and lolly money. And the question was, how reliable was Roy? Eric had a high regard for Roy. He was his best friend, the best friend he'd ever had. Yes, Roy would stick by him. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, would he be of any use? Roy was never short of ideas, but his brain was like a Catherine wheel. It threw them off in all directions. Roy, meanwhile, was pulling on his other sock and talking more or less non-stop. "How you feeling, Eric? What's it like down there? So much for Jimmy and his magic patch, hey?" When he'd finished dressing, he quickly squeezed his trunks out and rolled them up in his towel. Then he put the towel and trunks in his bag and sat on the bench. Then he said, "Right," and clapped his hands. Then he leapt up, took his jockey cap from its hook on the wall and sat down again. Then he said, "Right," again. Then he put his jockey cap on. Then he took it off. Finally, he put his elbows on his knees, his chin in his cupped hands, and stared down at Eric expectantly. Eric stared back. Here's trouble for a start, he thought. He's waiting for me. Roy usually didn't wait for Eric. He wasn't the leader exactly, but he did tend to organise things. Luckily, on this occasion, Roy was beginning to appreciate that something else was needed. "Right," he said, and clapped his hands. "Let's think." Roy then, at great speed, thought of and talked about practically everything. Eric's clothes, kit, watch, money, how to get past the attendants, where to go afterwards. He even remembered the code. In reply, Eric managed a "woof" or a woof woof now and then, but to little effect. The trouble was, yes and no were much use when the questions were either or. I should have said the questions were not much use when the questions were either or. Shall we sneak you out or make a run for it? Hide you under a towel or in a bag? Smoky bacon or salt and vinegar? My house or yours? Eric was a patient boy, and as it turned out, a patient dog. However, there were limits. At last, when they were still in the cubicle, and obviously getting nowhere, Eric gave way to a burst of serious barking. Not woof or woof woof, but woof, 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 woof. Roy was suitably startled, and his attention caught. He crouched beside his friend. "What's up, Eric? Are you trying to tell me something?" Or grrr, growled Eric, and startled even himself. He hadn't thought of growling, it just came out. Roy clutched at his jockey cap and backed away. "Eric," he said, and then, "You're still there?" At that moment something else happened. The plastic curtain was pulled aside, light flooded in, and a voice said, "What's all this?" Eric, it seemed, had caught more than Roy's attention. "What's all this?" It was the attendant, of course. "That your dog?" Rapidly, Eric retreated under the bench, flattened his ears and looked guilty. Well," said Roy. He looked guilty too. "It's not allowed, you know, no dogs." Now, obviously, at this point, if the attendant had simply asked Eric to leave, he would have left. In fact, he'd probably have made a more orderly exit than he usually did. After all, he didn't want any trouble. He'd had enough as it was. However, the attendant wasn't to know this. "Come here," he said, and brushing Roy aside, he entered the cubicle and made a grab for Eric. "I'll get him for you, sir," said Roy. The "sir" was conscious flattery. "He'll come with me." But it was too late. Eric was on the run. First he darted under the partition, back into his own cubicle. Then, when the attendant showed up there, he kept going into the next cubicle, and the next, and the next. Some were occupied, but there was a little protest. Eric was in and out so fast he was hardly seen. At the end of the row, he emerged, and on impulse ran into the clothes store. This was a mistake. The attendant, at his heels, yelled, "Albert, grab that dog!" Whereupon a second attendant leapt from a chair, swigged back a mug of tea, and joined the chase. Roy, meanwhile, was struggling to catch up. He was hampered by the 2 bags he was carrying. With some presence of mind, he thought to gather up Eric's clothes and bring them along. The chase continued, in and out of the racks of clothes, then out and down the corridor, into a part of the bath that Eric had never seen before. It was his extra bad luck that the attendants were young and fit, and, what was worse, bored. When they couldn't have been expected to give up, they did. This was entertainment for them, more fun than clothes baskets anyway. The corridor Eric was in had doors leading off to left and right, all of which were shut. Behind him he could hear the pounding feet of the attendants, and behind them, some way behind, Roy. "I'm here. Eric, I'm with you." Suddenly up ahead, Eric found more trouble. A woman in a white overall and carrying a pile of towels was coming towards him. Voices behind yelled, "Joyce!" and "Stop that dog!" Eric skidded to a halt. She was a wide woman, and it was a narrow corridor. He didn't fancy his chances. He barked a couple of times without conviction. His pursuers closed in. Then, when all seemed lost, a door opened and a pink man with a towel round his middle and a paperback book in his hand stuck his head out. "What's this?" he said. "Can't a bloke have a quiet bath in here?" As the attendants tried to pacify the man, Eric saw his opportunity and darted past them. Back with the way he came. Along the corridor, he met up with Roy. Roy was too breathless to say much, just "Eric," and a gasp or two later, "Got your bag?" Then together, and with the attendants chasing them again, they ran back into the clothes store, out into the foyer, past the ticket kiosk and the crisp and sweet machines, through the glass doors, down the flight of broad steps to safety. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. So I'll say goodbye to you. And it's also goodbye from my dog. From my dog, Eric. No, of course it's not Eric. Eric was in the book. This is Rosie. So it's goodbye from both of us. Bye.